Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending when you're watching this, students. We are now going to start our first lecture of Module 1, which is going to be discussing, looking at how the theoretical foundations are understood. So without any further ado, let's jump into it, shall we? So welcome to Module 1 of Soc 334, which is also known as Technology and Society. Today we're going to be diving in, as mentioned, in questions that guide this entire course, such as what is technology and how does it shape and how does it get shaped by society. So we'll look from concepts like smartphones to artificial intelligence. We often assume technologies are neutral tools that simply make life easier. But sociologists like myself argue otherwise. Technology is deeply social, reflecting values, interests, and power dynamics, and we're going to explore why. So let's get to the big question. What is technology? So when we think of technology, it's easy to picture gadgets, phones, laptops, electric scooters zipping up and down the street. But sociologist Matthew Min, one of the articles you'll be reading this week, reminds us that technology is far more expansive. Technology includes objects, yes, but also activities, systems, and knowledge. It's not just about what we use, it's how we use it and how it structures our lives. Technologies are not neutral. They shape and are shaped by society that we, as a collective, live in. So, from your readings as you're going through, make sure that you read all of them. These are supplemental lectures. Matthew Min argues to think beyond mere hardware. The use of Google Docs in class is technology. So is the syllabus that you hopefully have read, and I'm assuming you have read. So is the ASU Wi-Fi that randomly logs you out mid-Zoom or mid-class. These things not only reflect human labor and decisions, but they also reinforce systems. Who has access? Who is excluded? And who is always two steps behind because their tech is too, quote unquote, slow, right? The idea of how we understand tech plays into it as well. Think about people who use the concept Luddite, right? Like those who are not adapting to it. Cultural innovation is very important. And culture lag and culture is a big thing too. How much more have we also been impacted generationally? The famous millennial joke of helping boomers know how to use a PDF, but yet they run positions of power. So something to think about. Technology is layered with intention, limitation, and often control. When someone says tech is just a tool, they're ignoring the whole power structure built around who gets to use that tool and who gets left out of the room entirely. And I say this a lot too, that generative AI is a tool, but it's a question of how is it being used, right? The tech that we see that's around us is very much who has access and who doesn't. And it's not just access, it's also what is that meaning? What counts as advanced or modern technology depends on who is doing the defining, right? A water purification system might be life-changing in a rural village, but it's invisible to someone scrolling on an iPad in Phoenix coffee shop, right? That cultural framing matters. Matthewman encourages you within your reading for us to see technology as relational, not just things we use, but relational, but things that are defined and given value based on their social and cultural context. So when someone says something is quote unquote high tech, we're often making claim about status, modernity, and whose version of progress is getting prioritized, right? And this is where we start getting into some of the fundamental concepts that we're going to be looking at as your slide's talking about. But this goes into one of the core theories of this class, the social construction of technology, also quickly referred to as SCOT. Scott, or the social construction of technology, pushes back against the idea that technological advancement is purely linear or inevitable. This theory, articulated by Y.B. Biker and Trevor Pinch, argues that technology develops through social processes. Competing groups negotiate what technologies become. Technology doesn't succeed or fail based on their technological merits alone. Their design and use are influenced by human choices, conflicts, and compromises. Think of this idea, right? So I worked in the sales world for many, many years. It used to be the biggest barrier of entry to be able to show someone a tool that was digital by getting them to even go to a video conferencing thing. Join.me was a big deal before GoToMeeting bought it. But think about now, hopping on Zoom is a normative expectation. It's not even really negotiated anymore. It's the expectation. Getting that Teams call meme, right? Video conferencing software and how it has changed with regard to trust and authenticity and user agreements has changed every day within its understanding inside this modern world. So Biker deeper point is that technology could have turned out differently. The dominant form we see today, the iPhone, the gasoline car, the QWERTY keyboard, is not the product of the best design, but the outcome of negotiating among relevant social groups. Think about the elitism that exists behind, do you have blue or green text? People literally negotiate friendships based upon if you have blue, which means Apple, or green, which means Android. Did you know that there actually is a app that you can install as an Android user to make sure that your texts come out as blue? That's how much it's negotiated. Those who have power or with power, access, and the loudest voice, they tend to be the one that wins. So when people talk about tech as it's naturally evolved or meant to be, Scott says, not so fast. What we have is the results of politics, conflict, and often exclusion. Technologies are never just technical, they're cultural and contested. So it becomes a big thing for us to consider. How do we understand it, right? Scott also gives us structured ways to analyze how this all plays out through three core concepts: interpretive flexibility, closure, and technological frames. Interpretive flexibility means that different social groups assign different meanings to the same technology, like how early bicycles were seen as thrilling and the definitive dynamics of masculinity were emphasized by athletic men within them, but they were viewed as unsafe and exclusionary by women who at the time were wearing skirts. Over time, these meanings compete, right? And one version meaning fades from view. But even then, Biker reminds us the winning design is just an endpoint of the social process. You think Cooley in his work of the social process, not an engineering inevitability. Inevitability. Finally, technology frames shapes how groups see the world, right? So it becomes very big in how we understanding it and defining what counts as a problem and what solutions even look like. So the social process, not an engineering inevitability. Finally, that the technological frames shape how these groups see the world. It's defining what counts as a problem and what solutions even look like. I want you to think about that. It frames how we see the solution. That means every piece of tech you use today comes with a hidden backstory or the hidden agenda of whose voice mattered most in shaping the final forms that we use now, right? Another pivotal point in our conversation is what's on your slide now. This is called the actor network theory, or ANT, right? Actor network theory, or ANT, takes things even further. It was developed by Bruno Latour and Michel Callan and John Law. ANT argues that non-human objectives, yes, technologies themselves, are actors in networks of power and influence. ANT treats humans and non-humans symmetrically, seeing both as participants in social networks that co-produce outcomes. Technologies aren't just tools. They are actively shaped by human behavior, and they actively shape human behavior. Crawford in 2020, one of your articles that you need to be reading, stresses that the actor network theory, or ANT, gives us different versions of power, not as something wielded by individuals, but as distributed. Think about how your smartwatch nudges you to stand or breathe, right? It's giving you prompts. It's part of a network, designers, code, data, and your own habits. ANT collapses the distance between intention and effect. There's no tech over here and society over there. It's all one network. That means we can't explain things like TikTok trends, AI hiring decisions, or smart home surveillance systems by looking at people alone. We have to include the gadgets, the systems, and protocols that are doing a lot of the pushing, right? Actor network theory helps us see how even non-human elements like Brink security signs can act as agents in a network, shaping behavior just like human guard might, right? The guard. In many cases, it's not the security system itself, but the presence of the sign that deters thieves, showing how power and action are distributed across human and non-human actors alike. This is actually true in companies like Brinks. Actually say this at the start of every year, along with when hackers tell everyone the top 5 password. And for like 20 years, I've been telling people password is the top password. Stop making your password password. But companies like Brinks putting that sign, and I've seen happen in real time. There hasn't been many burglaries where I live, but in the last 10 to 15 years, there was one burglary. It was an old couple who was very much a Luddite. They did not want to use a tech system to be security because it just wasn't something they were comfortable with. And the only robbery that happened in my neighborhood was because all the other houses, including mine, had Brink signs up front. More often than not, if you didn't know, most robberies are an inside job. More commonly, someone who did work on your house. It's maybe more commonly someone you know. It's actually very rarely the stranger. I talk a lot about that in Deviants. But right? That person robbed, and they didn't want to use the tech because it was complicated, thus incorporating that ant dynamic, right? Crawford further explains that Ant challenges the idea that technologies are passive or even merely reactive. Instead, they participate in shaping what is possible, what's expected, and even more morally acceptable. For example, a turnstile isn't just a metal and mechanics, it's a gatekeeper that enforces payment and regulates movement, often without human oversight, and pushes us to think about these objects as part of a moral behavioral system. A sidewalk ramp, a smoke detector, or a notification bell all act by preventing certain actors. Ant helps us realize that power isn't enforced through laws or people. It's embedded in our physical and digital environments. The scary part? Much of it happens invisibly, and we accept it because it's built into the architecture of our everyday lives. For example, how about all of you anxious people out there, like myself, right? And your notifications on your apps. Crawford, using Ant, would explain that the little red notification dot isn't just a harmless visual. It's an actor in the network that co-shapes your own behavior. It triggers anticipation, urgency, and social validation, pulling you back into the app and extending your screen time. Bo Burnham, I'm a big fan, was talking about what left do we have to conquer in capitalism? Your time. If you're a video game player, think about how every quest now requires time limits, right? It started with the escort quests, and now it's like you need to survive for 30 minutes. You need to turn this in this location. Your time becomes a predecessor and a predictor for the investors of how much investment is going. Look at games like Diablo 4. But that pulled into your screen time, not just a person told you to check in, but because the interface itself is designated to act upon you. And I want you to also think about how you view the actor network relationship in regards to people and social media and technology in general. I have this conversation in my deviance class a lot, but if you're someone who's in the dating world and you find out the person you're in a relationship with or pursuing doesn't have social media, is that a red flag? Because they're not a part of technology, do you assume negativity before you assume maybe they want to take a step back? We're even seeing a change inside 2025 plus that Gen Z is trying to buy light phones to be able to have less media dictating their every actor in that action, in that actor network connection. But that moves us on to the next conversation here, and this is the Californian ideology that your reading will discuss. So the concept comes from Richard Barbook and Andy Cameron's critique of Silicon Valley political culture. The Californian ideology combines tech optimism with libertarian individualism. It's the belief that technology left unchecked by government will make us all freer. You know what the problem is? This ideology often makes and reinforces inequality. By promoting deregulation and quote unquote freedom, it tends to benefit those already in positions of power, leaving others more vulnerable. We are seeing the kind of oligarchy right now in 2025 plus, and we're seeing how much that's been interestingly critiqued with people like Elon Musk and other tech giants being able to apply monetary incentive inside elections and gain powerful positions. We've seen that recently, and it's going to be continuing in the world that we're living in. Matthewman reminds us of the ideology shows up everywhere, from TED Talk, where a lot of us gain our insights and information, to startup slogans. You'll hear phrases like disrupt the system or move fast to break things, but rarely do those slogans come with a plan to fix what gets broken, especially when it's working class jobs or privacy rights. There was a huge in 2025 leak that all of OpenAI's resources were shared and billions of passwords were let go of and lots of privatization. Think about how the actor network theory could tie into how many folks are using AI to be able to have therapy and how much of their private information is going to be shared based on how they constructually know the actor and the network type of therapy. It's interesting. The ideology thrives on the myth of meritocracy, pretending the internet levels the playing field. But does it really? But the digital divide, algorithmic bias, and exploitive gig platforms show us that power is still very much concentrated. And it's just got better branding now, right? Barbrook and Cameron argue this ideology emerges from an unlikely marriage between the 1960s counterculture and the 1980s neoliberalism. On one hand, it champions that personal liberation, creativity, and freedom of centralized authority. Think like Whole Earth Catalog meets Apple's Think Differently campaign. On the other hand, it embraces free market capitalism, entrepreneurialism, and minimal government intervention. This hybrid worldview allows Silicon Valley elites to portray themselves as anti-establishment revolutionaries while amassing enormous wealth and control at the same time. Matthewman expands on this contradiction, showing how big tech companies often present themselves as platforms for empowerment. Think about how every major brand tends to suddenly have so much support for the LGBTQIA during Pride Month. It's something that we call out all the time. But even as they exploit labor, erode public infrastructure, and concentrate data in ways that rival the surveillance capacity of states, platforms like Uber, Google, and Facebook claim to connect and liberate. Yet they also restructure work into precarity, privatize public knowledge, and manipulate user behavior for profit, right? The Californian ideology, then, is not just a set of ideas, it's a cultural and economic model that prevents inequality as innovation and regulation as censorship. It's deeply influential. Your chapter will go heavily into that, and it's everywhere. Even how we talk about our own responsibilities to build the future without ever asking who gets left behind in the rubble. So from there, we have the conversation that Langdon Weiner talks about, which is, do artifacts have politics? And the truth is that artifacts do have politics. This is what Langdon Weiner famously argued, that artifacts have politics. Technologies are not neutral. They are designed with social and political outcomes in mind. Some technologies require or promote specific forms of political organization. Example, Robert Moses' low bridges in New York limit bus access to parks, effectively excluding lower income and minority communities. Moses designed these infrastructural artifacts to reinforce segregation. Weiner also introduces a critical distinction between technology that are inherently political, requiring centralized authority to even operate, and those whose politics depend on context. Think about how a prison's electronic locking system demands centralized surveillance and strict control. Contrast that with bicycles, which can be individually owned and freely used. The politics of technology aren't just how it is used, they're baked into the design. This means that our tools can enforce behavioral and structural society behavior and structure society, whether we notice it or not. Now, the politics of technology aren't just in how they're used, they're baked into the design, like how ASU's mandatory Duo app, which is that dual authentication, enforces surveillance-based models of trust, treating every login as suspicious by default, so it's immediately suspicious of you, very Foucauldian panopticism. Similarly, ASU's partnership with OpenAI and ChatGPT structures how students learn and produce knowledge. At the same time, you're also constantly accused of using generative AI, but yet ASU is in contract with OpenAI. So that's interesting too. Embedding automation and institutional control into the very tools meant to support creativity and creative thinking, right? And now, with all the incoming freshmen who are coming into our school receiving only digital student IDs, unless you have the grandfathered ID like I have, even the all levels, graduate, income, freshman, it doesn't matter. All of it is now on the ASU app, so they're tied to their phone. The material, physical culture gets replaced by non-material infrastructure, meaning your access to meals, classes, dorms, and even printers depends on the battery life of your actual phone, the internet, and corporate tech ecosystem that decides who gets in and who gets locked out. What happens if 5G goes down, Wi-Fi goes down, and you can't access your phone at all, and you're locked in a building, and the only way to get out is to be able to gain access through that scanning? What's going to happen? In The Whale and the Reactor, a famous book by Weiner, which you're not going to read necessarily in this class, but snips of you will, Weiner builds on the foundation by arguing that technological choices are never just about convenience or progress. They're about power and social order. He writes that technological systems are ways of building order in our world, which means when we adopt systems, we adopt its values and we adopt its constraints. If you want an example, just look at how smartphones have essentially required every human to be a part of have been part-time IT managers and unpaid brand ambassadors, right? We upgrade not because we need to, but because the system nudges us that way every 2 years, like clockwork, or else your group chat starts turning the texts green, which we just talked about. Weiner warns that once systems like this become normalized, we stop seeing it as choice and start treating it like gravity, right? He digs even deeper by pointing out how some technologies, like nuclear power, come with non-negotiable baggage. Highly centralized control, opaque regulation, military oversight, and massive investment. That's not exactly something your neighbors are voting at the HOA meetings for. Compare this with solar panels, which could be a community managed or individually operated. But here's the catch. Those democratic technologies often get sidelined because they don't fit the dominant economic or political model. Weiner is basically saying tech is political, not just in how it's built, but in whose vision of society it makes real. Do we want a society where a handful of people decide what the future looks like while the rest of us scroll through the terms and conditions like we actually read them? Because that's how you get another terms and conditions you'll never read. Weiner's work is your reminder that technological change isn't just something that happens, it's shaped by people, some of whom we elect and some of whom we can't even tag on social media. Also, fun fact, if you didn't know, it was Blizzard Entertainment, famously World of Warcraft creators, right, one of the first to allow the check this box to avoid having to scroll through pages and pages of terms and condition with games like Warcraft 3 when you had to create a new character and a new term of condition every single time. And this ended up being so effective, Facebook replicated it. Now everyone replicates it, right? So ask yourself, when's the last time you even read the 102 pages of the rules and regulations, the standards of procedures, or did you just check the box? So when we look at this construction of norms and values that we're deciding, we can also look at this idea of modern implication. On your slide, right? Who builds the tech? Who benefits? AI and hiring is predictive problems, right? But that's where we see modern implications. These ideas matter today. Algorithms are making decisions about hiring, policing, and credit. Who programs them? What biases are embedded in their design? AI-powered hiring tools have been found to discriminate against women and minorities because they learn from biased historical data. A well-documented case involves Amazon's AI recruitment tool, which was found to downgrade resumes that mentioned women's organizations. Facial recognition software often misidentifies people of color, with higher error rates for those of Black and brown individuals. Famously, Siri with Apple could not understand even Scottish accents to the point where they had to publicly apologize and people couldn't access their phones. And so there's a really good sociologist, her name is Deva Pager, who did a study on Black and white men who had both a felony and didn't have a felony. None of the participants actually had this, but it was an actual application cycle. When they applied to jobs, it ended up in the final data that Black men without a felony had a 3-to-1 less likelihood of being called back than white men with a felony on the same resume, showing name discrimination and also racial bias in hiring, as it's talking about that we've seen the history of our data being programmed into this not neutral, but based on our information technology of hiring software. It's a big deal right now in 2025 and above that a lot of the AI tools are looking for labels. They're looking for little tags. They're not actually reading your resume. So we're coming into a world where computers are choosing our jobs, not people. Crawford's 2020 article and Matthewman both warn us we're building systems that encode past inequalities into future design. I'm going to say that again. We're building systems that encode past inequalities into future design and future decisions. And it's not just biased data, it's the logic of optimization itself. What does it mean to optimize safety? What does it mean? Productivity, engagement. These values are defined by the creators and often leave marginalized people more surveilled, more punished, or more excluded. If Scott and Ant are right, then there's nothing inevitable about this. These systems reflect choices, social, cultural, and economic, and we can challenge them, but only if we stop pretending that tech is neutral. So things to think about, that technologies aren't neutral. Power embedded in artifacts, Weiner's conversation, bridges blocking off access to certain groups, the conversation that Robert Moses has on restricting access. We can think about the gig economy that you'll read about in this class, freedom or precarity, how much stigma comes with those who have chosen to take control of their means of production and end up having the impact of OnlyFans stigma or Uber workers not being able to have health care. You'll read about this with Easterbrook and Smith later in the class. So a critical question that I have for you, right, is this. So we need to talk who builds technology, who benefits, and how do we make ethical choices about the future of technology? What about and how do we look at the user design, user experience? UX data is huge for sociology. How do we think about race, gender, and class? Dominant linguistic ideology points out that we leave out the dominant group, and then suddenly we don't think that they're being prioritized, but they're actually remaining in power, hidden from plain sight. So who gets design and controls the technology? Who is represented in the data, right? When we had all these cases of weird statistics, it's huge, but who also gets excluded? And I wanted to leave you also with a interesting, so these are the questions for you. Whose interests shape technology? How do we design ethical and equitable futures, right? And we also have who benefits from these technological systems and how do we design more just technologies? Kind of a framework of what I just said. But I also wanted to leave you with some thoughts for Yellow Dig, as I know it's always important for some to have some kind of control, not just laissez-faire, right? What you think we're talking about. So here's a discussion prompt for you for this week. Which technology shapes your daily life the most and how? Reflect on how it structures your choices, access, and behaviors. How does it reinforce or challenge existing power dynamics? And I want to leave you with a closing thought, right? So let me bop back out of this and I'll leave you with my closing thought. This is what I want to kind of talk to you about. Technology is not just about hardware and software. It's about power, access, and agency. As we move forward in this course, we'll keep asking the really important questions. How can we shape technologies that create a better, more equitable future? We'll continue to use theoretical frameworks like Scott and Ant, along with critical insights from thinkers like Weiner and Barbrook and Cameron to unpack these complex issues, or bring in Foucault and so much more. Our design and our goal is to develop a critical sociological imagination and understanding of the technologies that shape our world. Now, this course, we're just getting started. Make sure that you're always going through and reading the readings. You're going to have occasionally, more often than not, I'm going to try to include them, some additional lectures from some of my colleagues that I think will add to the spice of this class so it gets more flavor. But that's not always going to be the case in every module. So make sure to always go through the modules. If you have any access issues with the articles, I've made sure that we don't use a book, but I've also put the links up there. If anyone's restricting the access, make sure to let me know because I don't want to do exactly what this is talking about and not have you have access. I can always try to send you the PDFs, but do your best, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. I'll catch you then.